Clint Walker, a name once synonymous with the Western hero. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, he was the face America trusted, the image of strength, integrity, and kindness, all embodied in a towering figure with gentle eyes and a deep, steady voice. When he appeared in Cheyenne, Hollywood's first television series about the American West, Walker became more than just an on-screen icon. He became a spiritual symbol for an entire generation. People saw in him what they wanted to believe, that in a chaotic world, there were still men who chose to live by conscience, not by the gun. That strength did not need to be loud, and that kindness could wear the quiet face of a cowboy. But as with all lights in Hollywood, the glory eventually faded. Clint Walker, once a nightly presence on millions of American television screens, slowly disappeared. No scandals, no farewells, no retirement announcements, only silence. While his contemporaries chased new fame, he chose to live in the mountains of Utah, far from the noise and the cameras. No one understood why a man so beloved across the nation would walk away from it all. No one heard him complain or explain. He simply said, "I've lived in the light long enough. Now I just want peace." Clint Walker, the soft-spoken cowboy with the sorrowful eyes, became one of the rare figures admired not for fame, but for humility. He once made America believe that goodness could stand tall even in the desert of ambition. And so, a question lingers, quiet just as he once lived. What made that silent hero walk away from Hollywood and live as if fame had never existed? To find the answer, we must return to the beginning, to Hartford, Illinois, where a boy named Norman Eugene Walker grew up in poverty, learning to survive through silence. May 30th, 1927, in Hartford, Illinois, a small town lying along the banks of the Mississippi River, where the air smelled of oil smoke and the steel mills groaned endlessly. The Walker twins came into the world. The boy was named Norman Eugene Walker, and his twin sister, Neoma Lucille Walker, was affectionately called Lucy. They were born at a time when America was trembling under the weight of the Great Depression, when the American dream was coated in coal dust, and people put their faith only in labor. Their father, Paul Arnold Walker, worked for the Shell Oil Company, a dry, taciturn man who often turned to drink to forget his exhaustion. Their mother, Gladys Hulda Schwanda, of Czech Moravian descent, was gentle yet resilient. She worked in a steel mill and raised the twins with her calloused hands. Clint, or Norman as he was then, was an unusually large child. By the age of 12, he had outgrown his father, with broad shoulders and rough, work-worn hands. But behind that imposing frame lay a gentle soul. People remembered the giant boy sitting quietly on the doorstep, reading old newspapers filled with Western adventure stories, while Lucy ran laughing through the streets. Lucy was the light, and Clint was the shadow. She was quick, talkative, and full of laughter. He was silent, observant, and introspective. Their mother often said, "You two are halves of the same soul, one looking outward, the other inward." Clint's childhood was far from peaceful. His father, whether from pressure, from drink, or from silence, slowly drifted away from the family. His mother worked herself to exhaustion, but never complained. The boy learned strength from her quiet endurance. No tears, no protests, only perseverance. At 15, Clint left school to work in a factory near the river docks. In the early days, his hands bled from the steel wires, but no one ever heard him utter a complaint. Each morning, people saw him pushing crates larger than himself. Each night, he would quietly wipe the oil off his shirt and help his mother tidy the house. Once, Lucy asked, "Aren't you tired?" He smiled and replied, "Of course I'm tired, but we don't get to choose an easy life." That answer would later define the way Clint Walker lived, both in his craft and in his life. A kind of calm acceptance, without self-pity, without resentment, only endurance. In 1944, as World War II reached its fiercest stage, Clint had just turned 17. He was too young for the army, yet he refused to stay in Hartford, a place where every road led back to the factory and fatigue. So he volunteered for the Merchant Marines, the civilian fleet that transported supplies and ammunition for the U.S. military. It was the first decision that took Clint out of the shadow of his small town and into the vast world of waves, wind, and solitude. On a cargo ship bound for the North Atlantic, the young sailor, who had never seen the ocean, stood his first night watch in freezing cold. The sea was pitch black, moonless. Only the steady hum of the engine and the salty smell of oil filled his lungs. He thought of his mother, of Lucy, and whispered to himself, "If I'm still alive in the morning, I'll never fear anything again." One night, as the ship crossed the waters near Newfoundland, a violent storm struck. Waves nearly 30 feet high broke the anchor chains. A massive fuel drum slipped across the deck. Clint lunged to hold it down, nearly sliding overboard himself. Afterward, the captain said to him, "You're a big man, Walker." But what saved this ship wasn't muscle, it was courage. That sentence stayed with him for life. Years later, when he became an actor, every time he embodied a Western hero, he carried the spirit of that night within him. A man not defined by strength, but by the refusal to run when others needed him. Life at sea taught him more than any school could: how to endure, how to be silent, how to trust his instincts. He once said, "In the middle of the ocean, you're nobody. No one cares if you're handsome or poor. All that matters is endurance." His shoulders darkened under the sun. His skin turned leathery from salt and wind. His arms hardened from hauling ropes and cargo day after day. But in those cold nights, standing alone on deck, he learned the most precious thing: inner stillness. A quiet strength that he would carry through his entire career, even amid Hollywood's lights and applause. When the war ended, Clint returned to land. No diploma, no possessions, only two things: his health and his calm. He once said in a 1984 interview, "After those nights on the ocean, noise doesn't scare me anymore. What scares me is losing the peace inside my head." From the giant boy by the Mississippi to the sailor on storm-tossed decks, Clint Walker had learned how to live with loneliness without letting it consume him. He walked out of the sea carrying the light of silence, a light that would follow him for the rest of his life. Before Hollywood found him, Clint Walker had already completed his own journey, one with no audience, no glory, only labor, storms, and courage. And it was there that the figure of the Western hero began to take shape. Not through fame, but through steadfastness. When the war ended, ships returned to port carrying thousands of young men, exhausted, sunburned, and lost. Clint Walker was among them. No diploma, no direction, only calloused hands and eyes that had seen too many storms. He left the Merchant Marines as quietly as he had joined. At 19, Clint owned nothing but the habit of never complaining and a presence that made people stop and stare. He once said, "I never thought I was special, I just knew how to work and live. Texas, late 1940s. Clint worked as a dock laborer at an oil yard, then in coal mines, sometimes driving trucks that hauled freight across small towns. Everywhere he went, people remembered the silent giant, nearly 2 meters tall, broad-shouldered, his voice deep like the sound of waves. But behind that toughness was an emptiness he couldn't quite name. At night, he would sit alone on the porch of a cheap boarding house, smoking a low-grade cigarette, staring at the distant lights of a gas station and wondering, is this all I was born to do? Occasionally, Lucy sent letters from Illinois. She wrote about their mother, about the old town, and asked, "Are you happy, brother?" Clint never replied. Not because he didn't want to, but because he didn't know what happiness looked like. One day, while working in Brownwood, Texas, he witnessed an accident. A worker got caught in a winch cable during a cargo transfer. Clint rushed forward, using all his strength to pull the man free, but he didn't survive. After that night, Clint grew even quieter. He later recalled, "I realized strength means nothing if it can't save someone." From that moment, he began to understand. Some pain can't be fought with fists. It can only be endured with kindness. That became the foundation for all his later roles. Men who appeared strong, but carried a gentle sadness inside. In the years that followed, he drifted through California and Nevada, doing every job he could find. Gate guard, construction worker, copper miner, even a brief stint as a porter in Long Beach. He never stayed long. Whenever restlessness returned, he moved on again. It was as if he were searching for something he couldn't yet name. At 23, he married Verna Garver, a kind secretary. They had a daughter, Valerie, born in 1950. But even with a family, Clint still felt out of place. Each morning, as he stepped outside, he would look up at the sky with a strange feeling, as if life were waiting for him somewhere else, behind a door not yet opened. In the early 1950s, Clint worked as a security guard at the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas, where stars like Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, and Judy Garland often performed. Every night, he stood by the entrance, opening doors, smiling, keeping order. From the shadows, he watched the glittering suits, the laughter, the golden glow of fame. Sometimes a drunk guest would joke, "A big guy like you? Why don't you try acting?" Clint would just smile. "I'm not made for noise." But it was in that very noise that destiny noticed him. One night in 1954, while Clint was on duty, actor Van Johnson, a major star at the time, stepped out of the casino, glanced at him, and said, "You've got the face of a hero. Why don't you give Hollywood a try?" Clint thought it was a joke, but Van Johnson handed him the address of a talent agency in Los Angeles. That night, Clint couldn't sleep. For the first time in years, he felt something flicker inside, not belief in fame, but in the possibility that life could be larger than he'd known. A month later, Clint left Las Vegas with a few clothes, a little money, and a handwritten address. On the bus crossing the Mojave Desert, he stared out the window as the wind swept golden dust across the plains and whispered to himself, "If fate has found me, I won't run." The young man didn't yet know that the 10 quiet years behind him, from factory floors to stormy decks, from oil docks to casino doors, were the opening chapters of the greatest role of his life, Cheyenne Bodie, the silent hero of the West. Amid sweat, engines, and desert dust, Clint Walker learned what no school could teach. To go far, you must first learn to stand firm in solitude. And within that solitude, a star was quietly being born, not from light, but from endurance. In 1955, a man nearly 2 meters tall, with a deep voice and gentle eyes, walked into the Warner Brothers office in Los Angeles, holding a hastily written note of introduction from Van Johnson. No one in that room knew they were looking at one of the faces that would define an entire era of American Western television. His name was Clint Walker. Hollywood at the time was a world of relentless ambition, where the dazzling lights could burn those unaccustomed to them. But Clint was different. He wasn't chasing fame. He didn't dream of becoming a star. He went there guided only by a quiet intuition. Maybe this is where life wants me to go. Henry Wilson, the legendary manager who had built Rock Hudson's career, saw in Clint something Hollywood was missing: strength wrapped in silence. He said, "You don't have to say much, just stand still, and people will believe you're a hero." And so, Warner Brothers cast Clint Walker as Cheyenne Body in a new television series called Cheyenne, a daring experiment. The first long-running Western ever made for American TV. The moment it aired, Cheyenne exploded in popularity. Audiences were captivated by the image of the solitary cowboy riding across the plains, his thoughtful gaze and voice as soft as the wind. On screen, Cheyenne wasn't a violent hero. He didn't shoot to prove his strength. He fought to protect and forgave more often than he punished. In a world weary after war, that kind of heroism touched America deeply. A 1956 newspaper wrote, "Clint Walker doesn't act like a hero. He simply is. And that's enough to make people believe goodness still exists." Within months, Cheyenne became the most watched program on American television. Children wore cowboy hats and belts branded Cheyenne. Women pasted Clint Walker's pictures on their mirrors. Life magazine called him the Greek god cowboy, the Western hero with the body of a Greek god. Millions of viewers wrote letters to Warner Brothers, calling him America's ideal man. But behind it all was a truth few knew. Clint Walker hated the noise. While others basked in flashbulbs and fame, he kept to his quiet ways, driving himself to the set, eating lunch alone, sending most of his earnings to his mother and daughter. A colleague recalled, "When the director yelled, 'Cut,' everyone laughed and chatted. Clint just sat silently, took off his hat, and stared into the distance. I think he still carried the quiet of the sea inside him." Success came so fast that Clint had no time to prepare. His Warner Brothers contract pushed him to exhaustion. 12 to 14 hours of filming each day, no weekends off, no say over scripts. His pay was a fraction of the profit the series generated, yet he never complained. He simply said, "I don't like arguments. I just want to do honest work." In 1958, after being forced by Warner to film extra episodes beyond his contract, Clint went on strike, a rare act in those days. The studio sued him, banned him from the screen, and he had to leave Cheyenne for nearly 2 years. Headlines screamed, "The Western hero who defied Hollywood." But Clint said only, "I'm not fighting anyone. I'm just standing up for what I believe is right." That calm dignity earned respect and made him a symbol of integrity in the heart of a ruthless industry. When Cheyenne returned in 1960, millions of viewers welcomed him back as if no separation had ever occurred. The first episode after the hiatus broke rating records, even surpassing Elvis Presley's show. Clint appeared on screen, the same gait, the same voice, the same eyes, but deeper, quieter. Fans said they sensed a new sadness in Cheyenne. Perhaps because Clint himself, after clashing with Hollywood, had come to understand that every light comes with a cost. He said in a 1961 interview, "I wasn't born to be famous. I was born to work and to keep peace in my heart, no matter how loud the world gets." By 1962, Cheyenne ended after 108 episodes, a record for television at the time. Clint Walker left the studio carrying the title of the first Western hero of American TV. But to him, it wasn't just a role. It was a mirror reflecting who he truly was, a man of strength, integrity, and an unshakable belief that kindness never goes out of style. When asked what made audiences love him, he simply answered, "Maybe because I'm real. And in this world, real is rare." From a hotel guard to an American icon, Clint Walker never had to learn how to play a hero, because he had been one all along. But every light has its price. And after Cheyenne, Clint would learn that the brighter the light, the longer the shadow behind it. After Cheyenne, Clint Walker continued to act, appearing in Fort Dobbs, The Dirty, Dozen, The Night of the Grizzly. But the golden glow of the television Western was fading into memory. Hollywood had entered a new era, louder, harsher, where quiet men like Clint no longer stood at the center of the audience's attention. He kept working, kept appearing on screen, but inside him there was an emptiness. And then, in 1971, that emptiness was filled by a collision between man and fate. It was a spring day at Mammoth Mountain, California. Clint, then in his 40s, had just finished shooting a TV film. He went skiing alone. No crew, no cameras, only snow and wind. A sudden turn, an overreach, and one of his ski poles struck backward, piercing straight into his left chest. The impact was so strong that the metal shaft pierced his heart. By the time people found him, he was unconscious, his body covered in blood. Doctors later recalled that his heart had been punctured and stopped beating for several minutes. They declared him clinically dead. And then, something no one could believe happened. Clint Walker came back to life. When asked about that moment years later, he spoke slowly in his deep, calm voice. "I remember a light, quiet, far away, and I didn't want to come back. But then there was a voice, I couldn't tell whose, saying, 'Not yet.'" He woke after a long surgery, his chest stitched with dozens of sutures, his heart still beating faintly. The doctors called it a miracle. Clint only smiled. "I guess the Lord still had some work for me." That accident changed everything. The Western hero who once rode across the plains now learned to walk slowly, to breathe deeply, to listen to his heartbeat. He began eating carefully, meditating, giving up red meat, and he said he was no longer afraid of dying. Friends noticed a difference. Before, Clint spoke briefly, plainly. After the accident, he spoke even less. But every word seemed balanced by the weight of his heart. He returned to work just 6 months later in The Bounty Man, playing a cold bounty hunter. Audiences sensed something different. His eyes were deeper, quieter, as if each gesture carried the memory of death. On screen, Clint Walker was no longer a hero seeking justice, but a survivor searching for meaning. Years later, when asked why he continued to act, he said, "Because I owe life a thank you, and I want to say it through every role I play." After that fall, Clint slowed down. He planted flowers, exercised, kept a journal, and spent more time with his wife, Giselle Hennessy. A close friend once said, Clint used to think strength was what kept him alive. But after that, he understood. It was love. Visitors to his home in Grass Valley remembered that Clint would rise early, make coffee, and walk out to the porch where he'd hung his old ski poles, still marked by the dent from that fatal day. A quiet reminder that death had once stopped by and moved on. And perhaps from that moment, people began to see in Clint Walker not just the strength of muscle, but the strength of serenity. He once said in a rare interview, "I used to fight life. Now I just want to live in peace with it." In a world of heroes who always wanted to be seen, Clint Walker chose to be a survivor who no longer needed to prove anything. That accident, the blow that pierced his heart, made him immortal in a different way. Not on screen, but in how he faced life itself. Death had touched him, but taken nothing. Instead, it left Clint Walker a gift, stillness. And in that stillness lay the truest light of the last great Western hero. People often say that love is a gift of destiny. And for Clint Walker, destiny came 3 times, each in a very different way. 3 women passed through his life like the 3 seasons of a long journey. The season of youth, the season of redemption, and the season of peace. The first began in 1948, when he was still an unknown young man, recently discharged from the Merchant Marines, wandering between Texas and California. Her name was Verna Garver, a gentle, practical, and patient woman. They met when Clint was still trying to survive, not shine. Their marriage was simple. No wedding gown, no chapel, only a piece of paper and a promise. We'll get through the hard times together. When Clint took his first uncertain steps toward Hollywood, Verna was behind every one of them. The woman who packed his lunch for the studio and washed the dust off his shirts after long shifts as a hotel guard at the Sands. In 1950, they had a daughter, Valerie Walker, who would later become the first female pilot in the history of the Los Angeles Police Department, LAPD. Clint once said, "If there's one thing I'm proud of, it's not my career, it's my daughter." Their marriage lasted 20 years. When Cheyenne made him a star, Verna stayed in their modest home, far from cameras and headlines. Meanwhile, Clint, swept away by filming schedules and studio demands, was slowly pulled away by the very fame he never sought. In 1968, they divorced quietly. No fights, no scandals. Later, he said, "Verna was with me through the poorest years. When we parted, all I wanted was for her to have peace. Some loves aren't meant to be kept, only remembered with gratitude." A few years later, fate knocked again. In 1974, Clint met Giselle Hennessy, a soft-spoken French Louisiana woman, petite, calm, and kind. They met while he was still recovering from his near-fatal skiing accident in 1971, and perhaps because he had already seen death up close, Clint knew what he needed. Someone quiet, undemanding, simply present. Giselle brought him the stillness Hollywood never could. They married in a small ceremony. No press, no stars. She often attended fan conventions with him, sitting in the back row, smiling gently while he told stories about Cheyenne. She was the one who helped Clint believe in love again, to believe that one could still be happy after walking through darkness. During those years, Clint worked less. He stayed home, exercised, tended plants, and replied to letters from fans. When a journalist asked if he missed his glory days, Clint smiled. "I used to live in the spotlight, and it was beautiful. but light can blind you too. Now I prefer the light coming from the kitchen, where my wife is cooking." 20 years later, in 1994, Giselle passed away after a sudden illness. Her death came quietly, but left a void that nothing could fill. Clint vanished from public life for nearly a year. Neighbors said that each morning, they would see him sitting on the porch, staring at the garden Giselle once tended, saying nothing. When a friend asked, "Do you feel lonely?" he whispered, "She never left. I still hear her in the wind." After Giselle, many thought Clint would spend the rest of his life in complete solitude. But once again, destiny refused to leave him alone. In 1997, he met Susan Cavallari, the last woman of his life, gentle, private, and deeply understanding. When they met, Clint was 70. Susan was nearly 20 years younger. Yet between them was a rare harmony. They both loved nature, disliked noise, and cherished simple things. They married in Sparks, Nevada, in a small ceremony. No photographers, no stage, just two people and a few close friends. From then on, Susan became his companion through the last 2 decades of his life. She often accompanied him to Western film conventions, where fans lined up for autographs. They said that even in old age, Clint still stood tall, with the same gentle smile, and Susan always walked beside him, quietly holding his hand. A close friend said, "When Susan came into his life, Clint seemed young again. He talked about the future, about mornings, about learning to cook. For someone who had already touched death, that was a sign of rebirth." They lived simply in Grass Valley, California, a small wooden house among the pine trees. Clint rose early, brewed coffee, and walked out to the porch, where he kept his old ski poles, still dented from that long-ago accident. Whenever someone asked why he still kept them, he would answer, "To remind myself that life is fragile, and love is the only reason worth waking up for." At 80, Clint Walker was no longer the cowboy hero riding across the plains. He was a man growing old in peace, still tall, still calm, and still carrying in his eyes that quiet warmth time could never erase. 3 women, 3 chapters, 3 ways of loving, all leaving him with the same lesson. True strength isn't found in muscle, but in the capacity to love, endure, and forgive. From Verna, who walked with him through poverty, to Giselle, who helped him find the light again, and Susan, who held his hand through the twilight. The life of Clint Walker stands as proof that some heroes aren't born to fight, but to love, quietly. In his final years, Clint Walker lived in Grass Valley, California, a town nestled among dense pine forests where the morning fog always blanketed his porch in white. There, people seldom mentioned Cheyenne, and rarely called him a Western star. They knew him simply as a tall, kind man who walked every morning, greeting his neighbors with a deep voice and a soft smile. He no longer wished to be remembered as a legend, only as a man who had lived through everything and learned how to be at peace. At 80, Clint still stood tall, his shoulders broad, his eyes clear. His body bore the old scars, a chest once pierced through the heart, the traces of youth's storms. But his spirit had never weakened. Every day he spent hours writing letters to fans. No printed replies, no pre-written templates. Every word penned by hand. The letters slightly slanted, sometimes ending with a quiet blessing. Be real, and don't be afraid of being alone. He no longer made films, but occasionally accepted invitations to Western conventions. Among hundreds of younger faces, Clint Walker still stood out, not for fame, but for calmness. He signed each photo carefully, thanked every fan, and when someone said, "I grew up watching Cheyenne," he would smile and reply, "Thank you. I grew up with him too." Fans came to realize that Cheyenne, the on-screen hero, wasn't just a role. He was the reflection of Clint Walker's own spirit, a man of strength, kindness, and the quiet courage to always choose the harder path, the path of decency. In one of his last interviews, he said something that left many silent. "All my life, I've learned only one thing. You can't keep the light unless you accept the darkness that comes with it." In his later years, Clint lived quietly with his wife, Susan Cavallari. They tended their small garden, planting lavender and wild roses. Each morning, Susan brewed coffee while Clint read the paper, smiling softly whenever he saw news about a new Western film. "Our time has passed," he often said, but kindness hasn't. Sometimes his daughter Valerie, the pilot, came to visit. Father and daughter would sit for hours on the porch, speaking little. Valerie once said her father rarely gave advice, but every time she prepared for a flight, he would tell her the same thing. "Stay calm. Don't rush. Wings are strongest when the pilot isn't afraid of heights." That line, she said, was how he lived his whole life. Unafraid of heights, unafraid of falling, only afraid of losing his inner peace. Clint Walker passed away on May 21, 2018 in Grass Valley, just 9 days before his 91st birthday. His death came as gently as his life. No grand funeral, no loud farewell, just a brief family statement and quiet tributes in Western papers. Clint Walker, America's silent hero, has ridden off into the horizon. All of Hollywood paid him rare respect. Hundreds of articles remembered not only Cheyenne, but the man himself. Actor James Garner once said, "Clint wasn't just a Western icon. He was a reminder that real strength doesn't need applause." In 2004, Clint was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum. On the bronze statue of him astride a horse, his gaze looks toward the horizon. Beneath it, his chosen words are engraved. "Courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it." The legacy of Clint Walker isn't measured by the number of films he made, over 40 films and hundreds of television episodes, but by how he made audiences believe in goodness. In a Hollywood full of fleeting glamour, he stood as proof that a man can be famous yet humble, strong yet gentle, radiant yet quiet. Even today, when reruns of Cheyenne air on classic channels, millions of viewers pause amid modern shows to watch a man on horseback, riding across the prairie, smiling beneath the sunset. Not out of nostalgia, but because in that smile, they still recognize something rare: peace. He left this world as softly as the last ray of afternoon sunlight, leaving behind not brightness, but tranquility. There are people who spend their whole lives searching for the light, and then there are those, like Clint Walker, who only need to touch it once, before quietly stepping away, carrying with them a gentle light of their own. From the twin boy born on the banks of the Mississippi, to the young sailor among the roaring waves of the Atlantic, to the Western hero riding alone across endless plains, Clint Walker journeyed through 91 years of America. A life that spanned nearly a century, mirroring not only the evolution of cinema, but the changing ways people believed in goodness. In the mid-1950s, He entered Hollywood as Cheyenne, television's first great Western hero. The series Cheyenne ran for 7 seasons and 108 episodes, drawing over 35% of the national audience, becoming a cultural phenomenon unlike anything before it. Every week, more than 20 million Americans sat before their black and white screens to follow the lone cowboy, a man who fought not for glory or gold, but simply to defend what was right. Clint Walker became the symbol of an America rediscovering its dignity after war. Strong but not cruel, brave yet gentle. He did not act to be loved. He simply was himself. And that was enough for audiences to believe. As the New York Times wrote in 1969, Clint Walker doesn't need dialogue. Standing still, he tells a story. Over 50 years in the industry, through more than 40 films and television projects, he never courted scandal, never entered Hollywood's noise. He earned his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, the Golden Boot Award in 1997, and in 2004 was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers, alongside John Wayne, Gary Cooper, and James Stewart, the men who carved the spirit of the West onto the silver screen. On his bronze statue at the National Cowboy Museum, his own chosen words are engraved. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to go on despite it. More than half a century later, Cheyenne is still broadcast on MeTV and AMC, attracting over 15 million viewers annually. Proof that audiences still find in him what the modern world has begun to lose: calmness, integrity, and compassion. Clint Walker was more than an actor. He was a symbol, not of brute strength, but of endurance and humility. While others competed to be seen, he chose to live without needing to be noticed. While fame made many lose themselves, he kept the simplest thing of all: a quiet heart. I wasn't born to be famous. I just want to live so that my conscience stays at peace. Clint Walker. In 2018, he passed away in his sleep, softly as a breath, in his wooden house amid the pines of Grass Valley. No lights, no cameras, only the scent of wet grass and the distant echo of horses. And if there is a heaven, perhaps he is still riding across those endless fields where the light no longer blinds. It simply rests, calm and tender. When the light fades, people say the star is gone. But with Clint Walker, the light never vanished. It merely softened, enough to guide those who still believe that kindness is its own kind of strength. If this story reminds you of a time when goodness was still a kind of power, leave a quiet pause. For the cowboy who lived his whole life with gentleness and integrity. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the lives behind the fame. This is Hollywood Biographies, the light, the silence, the legacy.